Well, more than 300 students have been kidnapped from a Catholic school in Nigeria, with fears they are being held captive by armed gunmen. There are reports that at least 50 children have managed to escape, but hundreds more are still missing, as well as a dozen staff members. Ikemesit Effiong is managing partner at SBM Intelligence, a security and risk consultancy firm based in Nigeria, and he joins me now. Good to have you with us today. Now, firstly, what's the motivation for this kidnapping? Was it religion, or was it a mass kidnapping for ransom, or something else altogether?
It's highly likely that it was motivated by financial incentives. We have seen prior to this latest spate of kidnappings, we have seen something like 997 incidents that we've been able to track for the better part of this year. And about 4,722 people that we can confirm, right, that have been kidnapped, and the vast majority of those have been for ransom. It's worth noting that the latest spate, right, of kidnappings happened in central Nigeria, and the generally established motivation for a lot of these kidnapping rings is economic. We actually have a report called the Economics of Kidnappings Report, which has been tracking this over the last 5 years, and something around $6 billion has been paid in ransoms that we can verify, right, over the last 5 years. Yeah, so this is a very lucrative endeavor for a lot of the perpetrators who are involved in these activities, and unfortunately, it appears as though the spate and the rate of incidents is seeing a notable spike this year.
Yes, and then who's behind this? Because, to orchestrate something of this scale, in Nigeria would require, I would assume, a very high degree of planning, resourcing. So who, are other groups that are, I suppose, that are known to be behind these abductions?
There are some known groups, but in many of these cases, right, these groups are actually quite small. Many of them number less than 30, 30 people, mostly men. The original genesis of a lot of these groups actually lies in political protection rings that were retained by local politicians in order to secure their influence in many of these communities, and many of these groups have essentially run amok. We've also seen evidence of them plugged into really sophisticated supply chains, for the lack of a better word, where they are able to access arms. They've got a fair amount of collaborators, right, within the security services, but also within the formal sector to enable things such as financial flows. And many of them have become significantly emboldened. There are whole swathes of territory right across Nigeria where they retain effective control, right, and the presence of the state is absent to none. So in many of these respects, these groups have become emboldened. Also, I should add, finally, by the by the impunity and the lack of consequences. Really, there are precious few prosecutions, right? Investigations are few and far between, and many families and many groups are. Many affected families, right, are very reticent to essentially come out and testify against these groups, because it could jeopardize, their safety and the safety of their loved ones as well. So it almost feels like a vicious, never-ending cycle of violence and ransoms and unregulated impunity.
Yes, and Ikemesit, you mentioned that these groups are acting with absolute impunity, lack of investigations. So have things changed since the much publicized kidnappings in 2014 of the Chibok girls? Because right now we are seeing at the moment the Nigerian government redeploying tens of thousands of police to try to find those who are still missing from these latest abductions.
Well, I wouldn't say much has changed in terms of the modus operandi, right, of the security services, or even, of the government in terms of addressing this issue. The government, actually, since the Chibok kidnappings, 3 Nigerian administrations now have essentially been reactive as against proactive in terms of utilizing well-known intelligence. So it's not as though these groups aren't well-known, or their locales or their areas of operations, right, aren't known. They are known to the intelligence services, but there just appears to be that lack of political will to be proactive in protecting schools. There was a Safe Schools initiative that was launched in the wake of the Chibok girls ruling. It's not been resourced. It's not been funded to the level that it should have, and successive Nigerian administrations have just not made it a priority. On the kidnapping side of things, if anything, what we've seen an evolution in the types of attacks. Schools are generally lightly protected in many parts of the country. Secondary schools don't even have fencing to begin with, so they are really soft targets, right, to attack. And I think the international outcry that Chibok and subsequent mass kidnapping incidents actually illustrated to a lot of these groups is that there is a lot of significant leverage on the political and potentially on the financial end of things that they can bring to bear if they carry out these attacks. And unfortunately, the Nigerian government and state governments haven't kept up with that level of evolution.
Yes, of course. In the case of the Chibok abductions, we know that at least 100 remain missing, and we don't know whether they'll be found. Do you fear the same might happen to those who haven't managed to escape this latest kidnapping?
It is highly likely. These parts of the country that have become essentially the kidnapping belt, right, of the country. They are relatively sparsely populated. It's mostly rural or peri-urban communities. There are lots of places and lots of spaces within which to hide or potentially traffic, right? These kids, unfortunately, we have seen evidence in our line of work of some kidnapping victims found in neighboring countries months after. So there is a very high possibility that some of these victims unfortunately may never make it back home to their loved ones and their families.
As far as the central government is concerned, though, do you feel that there is political will to actually make an effort to create agencies to be able to deal with this kidnapping belt that you're talking about?
Not to the extent that it substantially addresses the issue, and in a way, the recent remarks by the U.S. president may actually put some oomph in the side of the government, which is trying, very much to protect and maintain a strong diplomatic relationship with Washington, to do something significant about this. President Bola Tinubu cancelled a scheduled appearance at the G20 summit that just concluded in South Africa in the wake of the 3 kidnapping incidents, right? That we've seen. Unfortunately, we haven't seen even that level of proactiveness in the past on the part of the government, right? So a sense that the world is watching, and there may be diplomatic and bilateral or even potentially multilateral consequences to, this security situation not being dealt with. I should add, despite substantial Western aid and coordination, right, and cooperation, right, especially with countries like the United States and the UK, may probably change the overall behavior of the Nigerian government. But as a researcher and as somebody who looks at this, 10 plus years of a track record on the part of the Nigerian government doesn't give me a lot of confidence that they would substantially deal with these issues. So it still remains to be seen how this goes from here.
Yes, I mean, you talked about Donald Trump earlier. He said that he would send guns blazing into Nigeria, but in the context of protecting Christians from claims that they are the ones getting attacked more than others. But is that something perhaps that should be considered, that U.S. assistance, boots on the ground, to be able to deal with this sort of problems?
The interesting thing is that there is already U.S. assistance towards dealing with some of these security challenges, right? The U.S. just I believe it was two months or so ago, announced a package of military purchases on the part of the Nigerian government, right? And that, of course, comes with substantial, training as well as non-lethal cooperation and military support on the part of the Americans. Boots on the ground may mock up what is already a complex picture, which is now being radically simplified into, Christian versus Muslim spheres. In effect, the reality on the ground is that it's far more complex than that. It's a confluence of ethnic, political, environmental. Climate change is a serious component, right, of this.
Yes.
Water access, right, remains one of the main challenges that foments instability in these regions, right. And so I don't know that American boots on the ground actually which substantially helps the situation. If anything, it may create a more well-defined adversary for a lot of these groups, right, to target. And as the US experience in the Middle East and other parts of the world shows, that can easily, that situation can easily get out of hand if not well managed.
Okay, it is an awful predicament for those there in Nigeria. But Ikemesit Effiong, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.